Okay, shut that music off. Hopefully everybody can hear me. Kevin, you can hear me?
I can hear you. Do
Oh,
you hear
dude,
me?
are you running that new software now on the mic? Yeah, dude,
Yep.
10,000 times better, bro. Now you sound like a DJ, man.
Nice.
So I had to travel outside of Miami for the next today and all next week, but the show must go on. So we're trying something a little different here. My mic might not be as good as in the past, but Kevin's rocking his shore right there, his dad's shore. Stole it. I left mine in Miami. You can see my high def camera is making me look a little, well, but it's cold here, dude. It's like 38. Dude, I drove up from Miami to Huntsville, Alabama, and I wasn't
Oh
thinking.
wow.
I got my, I was wearing shorts and a t-shirt, and suddenly I'm in Alabama and I go to get gas, and it's like 40 degrees outside with a wind, and I'm
Oh
shaking
my
like
gosh.
this, and I'm like, I made a mistake.
Oh,
I mean, I got
it's kind of
clothes up
cold
here,
here this morning.
so yeah. Well, cold for you 60, bro. We were like at
Yeah,
we were at
it was like
32
60.
this morning. Could have snowed. Anyway, I mean, I left New York so it would be warm. All right, so
No,
let's so Kevin's not gonna be able to drive at all today, unfortunately, but that's okay. He's you're gonna be my side, repairing. So I'll drive. You'll see what's going on. Let's go back through our notes and figure out where we sort of left off here. So that's I got a really big TV today. Actually, I should be able to. Oops, get on the screen here. Yeah, big big screen today, bro. Let's see what it looks like on VS Code there. All right, that's not bad. Everybody can see that, right?
perfect.
Yeah.
Yep. Looks good to me.
Maybe that's a little too much. Man, we'll go like that. Yeah, so hopefully you can see that. Okay, let's go. My mouse is a little slow on this big TV that I took the TV from the bedroom, man. It's like a 40-inch or something. So wild.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Actually, it's perfect for me, man. It's like nice and big for my eyes. I'm thinking of getting a bigger TV for the house. um, so we got the decentralized identification working,
Yeah.
except for the fact that we've hard coded that nonce value to 1. So
Yes.
I think what we said that we were going to do is start tracking in the config the nonce information, which now makes
Mm.
me wish we didn't call this sort of config dot JSON. Maybe it's almost like our db dot JSON, right?
Or store. Yeah.
Or store. I like db better than store, I think. I mean, it's just a local database, right? Now, at the end of the day,
Yeah.
that's kind of what it is. So maybe we'll also rename this to, well, at that point, maybe we have a folder called db, and then we just have this called data.json. And,
Okay. Yeah.
right, we just treat it like that for now, because then eventually this could be in any sort of data store, right?
hmm
It doesn't have to be that. So why don't we make that change first? We'll change this up to be db. We'll just manually do that ourselves. Everybody will have to do that again. Hey, this is version 0, so I don't want to hear it about breaking. Um, and then we're going to have to add the 2 fields for the nonce. We're going to need sort of like my nonce and your nonce or something. We'll have to figure out what those fields are.
Oh, okay.
Remember how we constantly renaming things because we realize that we don't have a great
Yeah.
mental model of naming stuff. So why don't we do that? And then once we can start recording the nonce and pulling the nonce out of this thing, then we don't have to hard code that anymore. And we're going to need this anyway because remember at some point to do the next thing, which is to have the private stream, we're both going to have to be able to agree on what the name is without talking to each other. That has to be
Yes.
random, but at the same time, at least between us, identifiable, and we're going to use the database to do that. So we're going to need this stuff anyway. So let me go ahead and let's make those changes, I think, to start. So that would tell me that this contacts isn't contacts really anymore. It's probably more like the database, isn't it? This
Yeah.
whole contacts, because there's a user. Like if we come down here, let's come down to our local. Life is all about refactoring as you learn more. And I don't think enough developers and companies are doing what we're doing, right? We got to a certain point, and now we realize, okay, we have to improve it. Instead of trying to fit the peg in the square hole, the round peg in the square hole, which is what causes all your code bases to go to hell, we're going to spend a little time today. I don't care if it's a half an hour refactoring to kind of where the code base is now. This is another reason why I don't want you coding for the future, right? Because imagine we coded
Okay.
a bunch of stuff for the future. Now we're here and we realize not only does this have to change, now all that future work has to change. And now you have to spend time changing future work that you're not even dealing with. And this is why I'm constantly telling people code what you need today. Think about tomorrow. Set yourself up for tomorrow. But every line of code you write has to be maintained. And so if you don't need it right now, right? Imagine how much more work this would be if we had done more than what we needed, is what I'm saying. So
Yes.
lessons learned here. Now, we called this doc user and document, right? But I could
Yep.
argue now, if I rename this, this is really our database, isn't it? I mean, that's what we're
Yes.
storing at
Yes.
the end of the day on disk and what we're sort of maintaining. And then we've got the doc user, which is sort of a record, but maybe this now even needs to be called. So as I do this, my brain is wondering, if we should have a DB. This whole thing is probably should be called db.go, right? Not contacts.go anymore. Sort of
Yeah.
db.go. Again, I'm not. Every time I look at this app package, I'm thinking, should we break it up into separate packages? Because DB could be a separate package, client could be a separate package, app.go could be a separate package. Like there's enough code in here to do that. And I haven't been doing it because I just feel like maybe it's been overkill to sort of do that with the little bit of work that's here. But it might be time to start considering that we break this up into some separate packages now as this starts to get a little bit more sophisticated. And I like the strategy of starting with a single package and then deciding. Sometimes it's obvious, right? Like on the server side, I think it gets fairly obvious to start breaking things up into these little firewalls, right? That's what a package is. And it wasn't obvious here because I didn't know how far we were going to go with this. But we're starting to take it pretty far. So I think what we'll do is
Yes.
um, let's do these renamings here. Make sure it compiles like clean. Then maybe we'll start breaking this out. So we'll create a DB package and move it. Make sure everything compiles. We'll do a client package and move it. Make sure everything compiles. We'll just do a little bit at a time and see where it goes. The real problem is going to be formats. That code will have to be copied wherever it's being used. I don't know. And ID. So maybe we do this work too and we see. We might spend 15 minutes and go, this is unnecessary and sort of pull it back. But, you know, at this point now, we're talking about this being sort of database stuff, right? So instead of read config, this would be read DB capital. Remember, we had
Hmm.
that conversation, a Go idiom, like for these
Yes.
sorts of initials and things like that. So that's a read database. And now it feels obvious that maybe we should have done database to begin with, but like I said, we didn't know enough, did we?
No, we didn't.
I don't try sometimes also to use the full search and replace. Sometimes I like reading the file and just making some other changes, right? Because one could argue that we called this doc here, right? Like if we really read this, so we called this doc, but it's not really a doc anymore, is it?
No.
And some people don't like doing what I'm about to do, where they declare the variable the same as the maybe the type or the package. And sometimes that can bite you in the butt if it's the name of the package, because suddenly you want to use some sort of exported identifier and the variable's there. And you get stuck
Hmm.
sometimes. But like, what else would you call this variable other than DB at this point,
DB. Yeah.
you know? But then this could be JSON database, because that's what it represents, the database in JSON form, right? So this is another
Hmm.
reason why I don't want to necessarily go full copy replace, because again, I could just rename this. It's also giving us, oops, an opportunity to read the code a little bit more. All right, so now it's having a problem with me renaming it, which is fine. Let's see what happens. Now, this is why. You see how we're using the type
Mm,
here?
yes.
So, so now what that tells me is the following. Um, if I can't, I hate inconsistency, right? So,
Yeah.
and now this would start becoming a smell. So one part of my brain thinks like this shouldn't be exported, right? If I made DB exported, all my problems go away. But this really shouldn't be exporting anything here, right? I mean, that's our database, and it's this collection of sort of user information. But like this variable now, right? It can't be DB. I don't necessarily like doc. I don't know, bro. What do we think it could be? It's not doc. It's not. Now, here's something. If we go back to your idea for a second, like using the word store, right?
Hmm.
Let's say that we went back to use the word store. Actually, I don't like the word store here because it feels too generic. But
Or storage.
no, because I like these words for the nouns. Like this is a concrete type, right? Like it's our store, but it's a specific store. It's really okay. How about we did this?
It's really a user store.
What if we did this? What if this was our file DB type, where one day we maybe eventually, like, this is what I talk about planning for the future without actually implementing the future, right? Somebody might be saying, where are the interfaces? Because you might want to use a different sort of store. And I'm going to scream, we don't need interfaces right now because we only use this one type of store. But I could see ourselves at this point saying, okay, well, let's implement what we think right now is going to be the file DB, right? Our local sort of file database. So this could be, this could still be read database, right? For the file, like for a file, well, it's a constructor. It's not a, um, it's not a method here. So what if we did this? See, now this could be DB. This could be a little bit more generic, right?
Okay.
And that's the point, right? Where we're going to be implementing a file sort of DB, and that represents some sort of user here. That's fine. Now, even this, maybe I just call it read database. So here's the question, right? Like this isn't perfectly necessarily set up for um, necessarily implementing it in an abstract way because we've got the file. But what if read DB was more like, well, I'm thinking, can it be a new DB, right?
Mm, okay.
I'm trying to think like if I wanted to, at some time, if I wanted to create an abstraction around this, right? And there was some interface, there would still be a new construction to get one of these. So for me, right, I'm curious where we're using this anyway. So we had in this add contact a read, oh, a read and a write, right? Boom, read, write, read,
Yeah.
write, read, write. And we sort of did that at a function level, didn't we?
Hmm.
So that doesn't set us up well for, this doesn't set us up well for applying an interface to it at some level. So we're going to do the following. We're going to change this API just a little bit that will allow us to sort of set up for different types. So let's do this for a second. Let's add a folder called storage. I didn't think we'd be working on this today, but let's add a folder called storage. And let's add a package here. We're going to call it our um, file DB. I'm wondering, let's use DB first. DB file, okay? And we
Okay.
had a new called dbfile.go. This is package db file. Now, I'm going to take basically all this code for now. This is all the implementation that we needed so far. All right, I'm gonna drop it in here. In fact, now I'm going to drop it in here now. I'm going to undo these changes just to keep that other file back to being somewhat clean here. Now, I don't know why you went red when I just basically reset everything. Oh, I just put everything back. So what are you complaining about?
Contacts.
Oh, did I delete something?
I think you did there.
Oh, restore that file. I don't know how I did that, but okay, good. Let's leave all the code we have alone for a minute. Let's pretend that we're going to implement this in a way where we can have different implementations of storage. Okay, let's say we were going to do that now. And the first one we're going to implement is called DB file. We could have DB Postgres. We could have DB Mongo. Okay, but we're going to have DB file. So what that would then tell me here, and I'm going to do it like this where we're breaking stuff just so we see it. So immediately now I could do this. Okay. And then what I
Now
would want, yeah,
as exported types.
as exported types, it's going to be in its own package, right? It's going to implement, and ideally, it wouldn't even really have its own data models. It should be using somebody else's data models, but we're not there yet. Okay, we're not there yet. A little bit of time, so we'll do this for now, and then we'll refactor that in, and then
Got it. Okay.
we could essentially do this. Now, since it's going to be an API, right? We'll return that, a pointer. And I don't want any of this right now. Stop trying to help me. And essentially, what can happen here is that on new, okay, we could go through that same sort of process that we had. Um, let's go back to where it did the write for a second. Oh no, that was read write. Let's go back to, you see, remember all this code? Create
Yeah.
config, read config, sort of all this stuff here under new contacts, right?
Hmm.
All right. Let me steal some of this code for a second here. So
Because that's essentially creating the config file there, right?
yeah, we would
Uh,
need a new, so we need
yeah.
to be able to do that. So I'm going to move
Hmm.
some of this stuff from a storage perspective over here for a minute.
So
And we
now
call this
it's DB. Yep.
dbJSON, right?
Hmm.
And what I want is you to create a DB folder, and then what I want is that DB file name, right? And then what we want here is a database, right? Check to see if it exists. If it, then create a database. And now this required an ID. Remember how we specified a ID or common address?
Common address. Yep.
Now, that bothers me a tiny bit because in this particular case, I feel like that's leaking information. Like we should have an API that takes the ID that sort of creates that record first. So,
Mm.
right? So, from my perspective, uh, all we need to do here on new, if I think about this, new, right, is if we just need to create an empty file at this point, or we need to be able to read the database at this point. And we could even call this, if it's, this would almost, we can call it create. But I shouldn't need to be passing ID right now in order to do this. Like there
Okay.
should be a different API that's either creating it and or reading it. But we know that we need an ID because of this first record, right?
Yes.
But this would be
Yours.
more like adding the user and then adding contacts, wouldn't it?
Yes.
And new should read it in if it does exist. So the create has me flustered a little bit. But let's just keep going with this without the ID for a minute.
Okay.
I loved this ID mismatch sort of thing. You know, like if I was, I'm thinking about Postgres here. If I was working with Postgres, what would this look like? There'd be a new, it would run a migration, and then I would go and I would try to read it, and then if I couldn't, then like if the ID was missing, I would have an API that said, you know, add user
Yeah.
and that sort of stuff, right?
Hmm.
But we also know that all that stuff can be done sort of upfront. So maybe I'm thinking too much about this. Maybe the ID being here is important. So let's not try to rewrite the API. Like I think that's a mistake I'm making right now. Let's keep with this semantic. Because even if we were using a regular database, let's say, this would still be required in order to do all this stuff. So
Got it. Okay.
so let's keep this for a second. So the idea then would be keeping this, all right. Um, Now this little business logic bothers me because this doesn't, I don't know if this belongs here at the storage level. The storage level shouldn't have this sort of logic. This is more of a business rule than sort of a
Mm.
database rule. Okay? So
Got
I'm
it.
gonna
Okay.
I'm gonna remove this and we'll move it up when we're basically done. That way, that line of code should work regardless of what storage mechanic we're using. Because if I leave it
Gotcha. Okay.
here, then any other implementation of a store would have to add that same business logic. And the chances are they're
Mhm.
going to forget, right? So that's why it doesn't
Yeah.
belong there. It belongs at a level up. And the reason we're asking the ID is in case we have to create this or migrate it from sort of scratch, right? I mean, that's the idea. And I don't know what this would be the equivalent of in another implementation. But we know that if you have to, if you're starting new, you have to add the user record at the very least for however
Got
that's
it.
done in your local database, right?
Mhm.
So here's your new. And then what I would say is something like the read here is going to happen, read database, right? All right. I don't think read is a part of the actual, say, public API for this. So I think we can
Okay.
keep that unexported and use it the way we're using it right now. Oh, now that we're using pointer semantics, this can be nil, right? So I think you still have that. That's good. Takes the file name. That's fine. This would be a DB. Now, what's interesting to me here is, yeah, that constructs the initial DB and returns it, right? So I think all that is good. So I don't think that changes. Where's the create DB? Here, let's put that first. Normally I put things in the order that they're seen or
Mhm.
used because it just makes it better for readability. So the very first thing you saw was what?
The
Create
new
DB. And where was it?
create
At the
DB. Yeah.
bottom.
Yeah.
Right, we really want that first. That way, from a readability, it's like a story, new. Oh, we're introducing this character. Why isn't that the
Great.
first thing sort of that we see, right?
Yeah, it makes sense.
So um, we have that. I don't know why it doesn't recognize. Oh, sorry, that's why. All right, better. Okay, so that takes the file name. All that's good there. This is now a nil, right? And then we're constructing a DB here, lowercase db. And this is a DB user. And this is a DB user. And I'm going to use the DB here anyway. And then, we write that out. And if all that fails, we have our nil. And then we return the address of our DB. Okay, so this still does a nice sort of create or migration in a sense, right? Even though we don't really have these sorts of changes right here. Um, all that sort of works for the new. So we'll create our database or we'll read the database in memory. That's the way we work. On something like Postgres, we wouldn't necessarily do this because it would be just as efficient to hit the database and or maybe there's some caching. I don't know.
Got it. Okay.
You know,
Yeah.
but the rest of this now gets interesting to me because new create DB and read DB are sort of functions that help with the construction, right? So if I were to just draw
Yep.
a line here for a second, everything now that comes next should be the method set. And right now, what I'm seeing is just sort of one active behavior, which is the write. And this is something then that could be behind an interface, right? I
Got
don't
it. So
care what yours.
this is something we would use outside of this
This is
package.
behavior that all storage implementations would need. But there's
Got it.
read stuff missing too, right? There's read
Mhm.
stuff. But you see, if we save the file name, so if I come back here, right, and we save the file name, and we now make all of this, let's say, unexported, okay? We make this part unexported because nobody should be accessing that, let's say,
From the
directly.
fields.
Oh, but we were using that to serialize. So you see what's happening here? I'm now mixing concerns again, right? I want this DB to represent the database, and I want to build an API around it from a storage perspective. But
Got it.
I've
Okay.
put these JSON tags here, so I'm leaking essentially some sort of details around what this is. And so what sucks at this point is that to sort of fix this, right, to sort of fix this properly, um, it's almost like everything I did under contacts, and contacts isn't the database part of it, okay?
Mm.
But some of the stuff that we did here under contacts, like lookup, add,
Add.
and these methods are really the API that we need as it relates to the storage. Like this is our API, right? If
Got it.
we wanted different storage implementations, it would have to be sort of all of this. So now this is what I'm thinking. This is what I'm thinking. Let's get rid of that for a second. Because we
Mhm.
have to ask ourselves, like, what is it that we need from the storage in order to be able to function? I started going a little too low level there, I think. So I'm going to do the following. I'm going to make a copy of contacts. I'm going to put it here. I'm going to rename this to DB file. Okay. I'm going to name this to DB file. And we're going to think about this now a little differently. Okay. This contacts, which is already all unexported, really represents, I don't know what I just did that. This contacts, which is unexported, really represents the database.
Yes.
Okay, I mean, that's really the database, right? And that really represents a user in the system. Okay, so that's from a storage perspective what's important. And this is already the new database, right? Give me a new database,
Yep.
which already knows how to, I'm gonna go here for a second, right? If we rename this to create database, which again, I think should be first
First.
in this list of functions that we wrote here. And this should be read database. So I was trying to take these lower level functions and make them the primitives, and they are primitives. But I think at the end of the day, that's not what needs to be necessarily abstracted. It's this functionality here. So
Mm.
now we've got a DB. I'll show you how this all comes together in a second. So instead of contacts, this is going to be DB, right?
DB.
Contact, yeah. All right, that's fine. And this is going to be db.json. But I really wanted that also in the DB folder, didn't I?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
And
it's going to be,
DB data. Yeah.
yeah. So I think now this join here was like that. Oh, but I don't have to do it that way. I can do it this way, can't I? So the DB file name for us is now going to be there. So essentially the idea is that under client, I'm in a new folder called database. The contacts are going to come under here. But these are really what? All the messages, right? And then the idea is this is going to come under here. And this is going to be called data JSON. So that's the idea, right? So if you open up the database folder for our purposes, you see data.json, which is this,
Yep.
and then we see the different messages, which is fine. And so all that is perfect, okay? Then from an interface perspective, it's going to be this thing called my, which returns my user. I hate that name, but we're going to look at where it's being used. Contacts, so you get back the list of contacts. Look up contacts. We needed all this stuff, right?
Yeah.
This is almost like, instead of lookup, this is now almost like a query, right? Query.
Query.
So
Yeah.
like if we were
Query
thinking more
contact.
in storage now, right? Query contact, right? And we could even do it like query contact by ID, right? Which is sort of a nomenclature I use a lot. Query contact by
Okay.
ID, right? Um, Now, again, if we wanted to stick a little closer to our um, sort of nomenclature for storage, instead of add, this could be what?
Insert.
Insert,
Okay.
right? So in this case, read DB, edit, rename. We call this now a, I don't know why I make this mistake, bro, all the time. I go into rename, and then like I move too fast, and then I sort of use it. So we're going to rename that doc user in a second. Actually, we might
Yeah.
need to do that first. So if I rename this symbol, well, you know what though? Like we don't have to change this because this is a implementation detail, isn't it? The fact that
Got
we're
it.
using
Okay.
a JSON document, right? There's nothing
Mm-hmm.
wrong with these names actually. Is this is an implementation detail, really? Like even calling this create DB, read DB, probably could have whatever. I don't remember what we had before, but or we had contact, which to me was wrong. But I don't think we have to rename this because this is in the scope of a DB file implementation. That is a document. It's a JSON document,
Got it.
right?
Okay.
It's a
Okay.
document user.
So it would make more sense as create doc or
No, I
create.
think I think create DB is fine, but like calling this type a doc user, I think is also fine, right? Now,
Okay.
I could call it, in other words, I could have called it DB user, but we're going to get in trouble if I use lowercase db for the type.
Mm,
I think we're going to get in trouble for it at some point because, look, here's the other option, right? I say no. You're going to be called the lowercase db. You're going to be called a lowercase db user, right? So let's play this out, okay? So now I get in trouble again, remember, because we've got to be able to
mm,
return that. I can't call this
yeah.
a DB anymore. So I think because it's unexported and what that data actually represents is a JSON document and a
Document.
document user, that I think these functions here can, right, do that. But then what I would say is create what? Because
Document.
that's what it's returning
Yeah.
as a low level. I thought at first that this should be the storage implementation, this code. But I'm starting to think that really this isn't what this exists because we're using a file,
Yes.
right? But the API that the app really needs is this one that we're looking at up here. So because look at add message here.
Mm-hmm.
Add message, we'll call write message, which is hmm, so what bothers me here now is that we're opening up the file here, right? It's doing
Mm-hmm.
create.
Yeah.
What is it doing? Oh, but that's the message stuff. That's not the data.json stuff. We kind of have like two different things going on here, right? Um, so this lower level code we wrote is all about managing data.json.
Got it. Yeah.
Okay, it's all about managing data.json. So if I just to stop getting confused, right? This is data, and this is data user, right? And if I call this create data file,
Okay. Yeah.
and I
Now,
called this, yeah, half the battle sometimes is getting the right
now
name.
there's, yeah, now there's no confusion there.
And I call this write data file, okay? So now we know what this is all about, right? Everything here is related to uh, the data.json
JSON.
access, right? Creating it, reading it, and writing to it. But this is in the whole. Like we don't really query this because we keep it in memory, and then we
Yes.
sort of just do this very large um, write back to it, which isn't very efficient. But at most, you might have 1,000 users. So there's no reason to add complexity for anything other than that, right? So you
hmm
have this whole sort of data JSON access, some lower level stuff to manage this. If this was Postgres, this would be probably two tables,
Got it.
right?
You would have you and then your contacts.
A user, and then you'd have contacts, right? Um,
Yeah.
so this has given us very primitive functions to just basically create, read the whole thing, and write to it. It's not giving us query functionality or anything like that. Everything up here is sort of doing the query stuff for us, right? It's also,
Got it.
however, managing a third thing, which is these contacts in terms of like the messages that we're storing, right? So we've got addresses, you got names, then you have the messages. And from a storage perspective, sort of what we're looking at again is, so let's go back and look at new again. So I need a new database. What does that mean? It means that we might have to create or read the data file. Now this is looking
Now
much
it's
better,
it's
right?
it's clicking. Yeah.
Right. And maybe instead of document here, actually instead of using data here, let's take it to the next level, data file, right?
And data
And
user.
a data file user.
Okay. Data.
See, to me, when this doesn't match this, we're not really in sync, right?
Got it. Okay.
But we've just spent the last half an hour, and what are we sort of fighting against?
Naming.
Yeah, all day long.
Naming.
Naming is hard. And most people won't spend the time like this, but I can't explain it to you because we're using the wrong names. I can't refactor this properly because we're using the wrong names, which are not giving us a strong representation of what we did. We wrote this code, I don't even know how many weeks ago. So it's showing that we didn't do things in a way that allowed us to maintain a mental model. Somebody asked me, what does it mean to have a legacy code base? And what I said was that you have a code base that developers are working on where they don't have mental models of the code base anymore. That could be a
Got it.
brand new code base, or it could be a
hmm
20-year-old code base. This code I would consider was becoming legacy because we're losing track of sort of the mental models. We're spending all this time, almost an hour, just trying to figure out what this code does, right?
Yes,
That
exactly.
sucks, man, because I could have just hacked what we talked about at the beginning.
Yep,
But that's how this is how the code becomes unusable at some point.
exactly,
So
because you're just stacking on top of the problems that are already there.
exactly, you're stacking on top of the problems instead of asking yourself, do I really understand what this code does? How has it changed over time, right?
Hmm.
To a point where we have to rename things and maybe move some things around. Okay, so if we call this data file now,
Hmm.
right, and these are lower level, right, access functionality again. Now when I come back here, let's go back. So create the data file, right?
Yep.
All right, perfect. So we create a data file. The data file has the contacts. So let's
Hmm.
go back to this naming problem now. I said you have contacts, which is a collection of what? A data file
Data
user.
file users. Yep.
But why are we not using the word contact? Oh, because we had a user here, which was
Yes.
a data file contact. We called it user. But even that's generic. Like, what user is that,
Mm,
right? And
yeah,
that's where we started having me and my and I don't have a
because
great
data,
name for, yeah, go on.
yeah, because data file contact is also representing us, but then at the same time, it's representing people that are in your contact list also. So you're kind of like clashing the two names
A little bit.
versus, yeah,
It's not clear that that user is you, right?
you or somebody else. Yeah.
Right. Now, maybe, maybe, I come back here for a second. Maybe if this was account, would that make it clearer that we're talking about your account information related to this?
Yeah.
Um, because anytime we see something and it says account, would that represent us, right? Like if you go to a website and you're looking for like, what would you see in the corner? My account,
My account. Yep.
my account, right?
Hmm.
Making it clear that it's my account, or um, like let's just briefly look at something here. Like here is GitHub. What does it say? It doesn't just say profile. It says what? Your profile. Your. Right?
Hmm. So we could put your account.
I don't like your here though.
I don't either.
My felt better, didn't it?
Yeah, I think it's because it's shorter. For me, it just feels better.
Client
Client
account.
account. Client account isn't bad.
What does Google do?
Manage your
Manage your
Google account.
manage your. What do you see over and over? I've never noted. I never looked at this before actually, which is interesting, right? Everybody's using what? Your.
Your
At least in the
in the
um,
front.
on the front end, everybody's using your account. Isn't that interesting? We got to look at it one more. It's another website where I've got uh, I don't know, Twitter. It says profile. I don't know. Maybe that's not a good one. Um, where else do I have an account somewhere? I don't even know, dude. But I just said profile, it didn't move, so who knows? Um, Do we do anything at Arden? What's the
Mm, let me see.
we have an education or something?
Ardanlabs.com.
Sign in.
Yep.
Oh, that's weird. I haven't logged
Let's
into
see.
here like
For
ever.
us.
Look what it says. My account.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
My account, your account.
I don't know why. I feel like my account is what I want to use here.
I think I like that better. Because at the end of the day, the user has to come in here to add contacts, right?
Yeah, the contacts, right. And then this is my account information.
So for them reading it, I think that's more clear than like client, let's say.
So, um, right. So then wonder if we rename this to account, right? And
So
then I'm
contacts
wondering,
is a collection of
yeah,
data file accounts.
an account. Instead of calling it a user, though it also does represent user information, doesn't it?
I didn't mind the name user because at
Okay.
the end of the day, you are still a user, and then your contacts are a collection of users.
So then why didn't you speak up?
Should
Okay, so let's call it, we'll keep it user. And then the data file has, I'm going to call this my account,
Yep.
right? And contacts. Okay. And all that sort of stays the same, right? So instead of me, now we can just call this my account, right? We keep
Mm-hmm.
this a user. You keep that. Now, if we walk back through this, you get a new database, right?
Yep.
My ID, right? It's my
Should it
ID.
be my ID or account ID?
Let's stick with my since that's the word we're using,
Okay.
right? Like for the consistency of this concept of my thing, right?
Got it.
All right, let's go back to the top. So, because then we say my account ID, see, to me it kind of works better too, right?
My account ID. Yeah.
Now,
Okay.
maybe this should be my account ID, right? And be a little bit more explicit. I don't think it hurts to be a little bit more explicit, right? So, so all that's good, right? See now this,
DB.
well, didn't matter. This is now what my account,
My account.
which sounds so much
Yeah.
better. This is your list of contacts. These are the things that need to be sort of abstracted away at some point. Query contact by ID, insert a contact. Let's look at our variables. So in our case, we read the data file and then we write that data file. I think that's fine. How you, in the database, you would do that differently, right? You would just do a DB insert or something. That's the
Got it.
equivalent of that. So
Mm-hmm.
this would be a data file user, DFU, and then all that is good, right? And then we add a message, and all that is good. And then we had this idea of reading messages. Now, what did read messages do? Oh, it read. the messages, but it read them in memory, didn't it?
Yes. And then,
So I
okay,
don't know where
yeah,
that
I
was
see that
being
there.
used, but most of these APIs. So for this okay. So
That
here's
was in the,
yeah, go on.
uh, I think that was where we had the, like for all the contacts, we had their ID, and then in there we had the actual message history.
Yeah, but what bothers me is that we're reading it in memory, right? And then I
Hmm.
don't know where how it's being used, in other words. So do we read it in memory and then they're making another? Because if we were using a regular database, right, we have to see how this is being used. I think
Okay.
this API needs to change. I'm trying to think about like, let's imagine we were actually using Postgres instead of our own sort of file thingy, right? What would that mean?
Got it. Now we're structuring more like an actual storage with that storage mindset.
Yeah. And this is bad because I had a literal string here and we've used it sort of twice, right?
Mhm.
So that was going to bite me in the ass because um, I don't like directory name, but I was about to make that mistake, right?
Yeah.
And since these are all somewhat similar,
We can
we'll
put it
just do
like
that,
that.
right?
Yep.
So the DB directory name, the messages directory name, and the DB file name. Now, when I come back to insert, add, read, and then this is an unexported function,
Hmm.
it does some of that lower level stuff, and then even some lower level stuff. So this has me concerned because we're saying read, but it's not returning it, it's storing it. But we had a reason for that. So if we were implementing this in Postgres, like what does that, so that's the question we have to ask. If we were implementing this using Postgres, like what does that mean? I don't know yet until we go see how it's being used. So we're going to do the following, okay? We've made some changes here, right? We've put this in its own package, called it a DB file, and it's
Yep.
for the most part the same API with some minor changes, okay? And it basically replaces contracts, right?
Yep.
Okay, so watch what happens. Everything, all this stuff just went red, right? So let's see what we now broke. So we could see here that db file dot new db is essentially what this should be, right?
Yes.
And this gives us a db, right? That's not being
Yep.
used. And this would have to be passed into here. Now, that's an invalid type. That's fine. We also know that it has to be passed into here. And we know that this is now my
My
account.
account.
Okay. So far, all that's pretty nice, right? So far. Okay.
And I like the names now too. New ID, new DB, new client,
Yeah.
handshake with my account. Yep.
So now contacts is a DB, right? This is our database. And this is a database, right? Now, my guess is that we got lucky here,
But we
not
did
getting,
not there.
of course, why would we? Oh, because this is a DB file, Mr. Kennedy, not a DB, right? We're
Okay.
using that implementation directly right now, which we're
Got
going to
it.
fix in a minute. But so now that's a DB file, right?
Yep.
Okay. And so we called this now query, didn't we?
Yep. Query.
Okay. We called this, I think, insert.
Yes.
Make it feel more databasey, right?
Yeah.
Now, if I go back to messages, shouldn't we call this insert message?
Insert. Yep.
Again, if we're going to be
Query messages.
in query messages, which I think this API is bad. And the write messages is the right word. It's unexported. It's writing everything back to disk, right? So given a message, it's writing it to disk. It's a lower level sort of, like this, sort of a lower level, right?
Yeah.
But the read, that's why the read bothers me a little bit because I'm wondering. Oh, we got to fix the receiver,
Yep.
by the way.
So,
So, do you notice something here on this write message? All we were
right message
using
file
is
path join.
the file path, right?
Yeah.
We gotta fix all this. Like here, we're doing a lot. Let's query. Inserting a message. Here, this is, okay, so inserting a message uses this lower level write message, right? Because it appends it to create or open a file appending, right?
Mm.
Okay. So it's a lower level sort of mechanic that we needed, which is fine. And then on this one, now, what's going on here? I can't call this. This has to be what? A data file, doesn't it?
Mm. Yeah.
It's data file. Data file, data file. Did I do the same silly thing here? No. Okay. And nothing
DB.
here. DB's fine. Oh, there. Okay. So this
Okay.
one was, um, and this is reading the in-memory database for the query, and that's our contacts, and that's mine, and all that is good. So this has to be a DB though, right? Okay. And that's the data file user. And that reads the data file itself, which is used to write a data file. Yeah. And you got read and you got write. Okay. So now I could make an argument. Read it. Yeah. Read it returns. Right. I'm wondering if I should make these methods, but it doesn't make sense to make a method out of this. because this is just writing to disk and it doesn't assume anything. So the reason that popped in my head, Kevin, is because I'm looking at this
Okay.
code here, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Read and write, okay? So
Yep.
read in the data file, that's fair. I get a new data file. But
Okay.
here's the data file. Then we updated the contacts, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
And then we're writing.
like I'm wondering why that didn't look like this, in other words.
Oh, okay.
You know what I'm saying? Because
Yeah.
it's behavior against the data file itself. And there's no state that's being maintained across that. So this is this is where some API design can get complicated, right? Because you're
Okay.
thinking that I could make it a method, but if I made that a method, then this should be add contact here, right? Like we read it, but that would assume that the state is being maintained, and it's not. Like once we write this out, this goes away, right? We're not maintaining this state. This is what I'm looking at. That's why these functions have
Mm,
been confusing me because um, I'll read it, I'll give it back to you, then you make some changes and you tell me to write that. That's how we've sort of implemented it, right?
yes.
Um, and you're not maintaining it after you write it. If you look right at our DB level, we have my account, we have contacts that we're keeping at some level.
Yes.
That these functions are not state that we're maintaining in memory at any given time. We're basically reading it to update it,
Yes.
okay, here, to then
Mm-hmm.
write it back, essentially, was what happens. This has been confusing because
So, oh, okay. So I see what you're saying. So you're saying the right data file should just be taking in the file name and just say, hey, write this here.
it
I
could,
already
it could, but we didn't do it that way because we don't maintain this data file in memory after it's read. It's literally
got it.
just read. I could even move this up a little bit here. There's like two things going on here, and that's why it's been confusing.
Okay.
Okay, so what's happening is that this is why some of this implementation has been confusing because there's a couple things going on that's not traditional. So here is update the in memory in memory sort of database of contacts, right?
Got it. Yep.
Right. So we keep the date, we keep it, and then what we've did here is um, update the JSON data file. So it's basically what we did, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then here we're just return the new contact. Or whatever. You see, and this is why it's been confusing for me since we started, because this implementation is really an in-memory implementation where normally anything that we're doing that hits this would be database calls. And
Okay.
so we're not really making database calls to get stuff. We're keeping it in memory. But then we're just
Mm-hmm.
sort of flushing everything to disk.
Got it. Okay.
And so I'm now starting to think that See, because now if I come back to this code, right, and make it a little bit more readable. So, oops. Read from disk, okay,
Write to disk.
write to disk. That's fundamentally what it's doing. And then create the data file, right?
Got it. Okay.
And let's just say I call this for now create on disk, okay? So if I come back here for a minute and we start reading this now, we start to feel that lower level, right? Like create new database, create on disk, read from disk. If I come back here now, you can see nothing disk related because we're reading our in-memory database, okay? This is an in-memory database, right? It's a map.
Yeah.
It's our contacts sort of in memory. It's my account in memory. So if I need a list of accounts, there's no database calls here because it's in memory. If I need to query, I'm reading the map because it's what? It's in our
In memory.
in-memory list of contacts, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right? Where this, if it was Postgres, it would be, you'd see a database sort of query there, wouldn't you?
Gotcha. Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So, you know, I don't think I want to do this, but let's say I call this our in memory, right? So if I look at in contacts now, and like it doesn't read right, I'm not going to keep it, right? But
Yeah.
just to read this for a second, right? So my account, but yeah, it doesn't read right, but it does give you that sense of I'm not going to keep it, okay? But when I look at this, this is starting to tell me DB memory, right? Because it's in memory
Okay.
at this point. But maybe we, oops, come on, man. I don't know how this happens. Rename, I moved too fast. So what if we call this cache for a second, right?
Cache.
So,
Okay.
so new database, right? We come in, create on disk or read from disk. Here's our contacts. Here's our DB. This is constructing really the cache, isn't it?
Yep.
Right? And so we construct our cache. There it is. We've got those users in it. Now, my account just returns this user from my account. Again, that would probably be a query in a Postgres environment, but that's fine. If we're going to get the contacts, now we pull the cache. We get all those users out of the cache. Now this is telling my brain that um, this data, right, for the contacts is in
As
cache,
in
right?
cache memory. Yeah.
Right? It's in cache. Give me the DB cache as opposed to, because if this was a real database, we wouldn't have a contacts list there. We would have it, again, this would be a query. Select
Yeah.
the user from, you know what I'm
Yeah.
saying, contacts. And
Yes.
I think that's what's happening to my brain right now, looking at this from a database file, is I'm losing track of update the in-memory cache of contacts, right? and then we update the JSON file, right? We update, essentially, we write that also to disk. Now, this is interesting to me because we read from disk, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, but we have two different types. That's why we do it again, right? We're trying to keep what we have in cache in sync with what we have on disk. So that's why we're doing this twice, right?
Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
Right? Now, we could argue, and I can't just do a conversion because we also keep the messages at this higher level here,
Yes.
right? As opposed to how we're doing it on disk. But this is where my brain keeps shutting down because our database is really an in-memory cache database that we happen to flush, right? I could even, what's the word I keep using? Flush, right?
Flush. Yep.
And flush is a good word here because what flush means is take what you have in memory and make sure that it's now permanent. Take what you have in memory, make sure it's now, flush it to disk. And so now if my brain reads this code, I'm like, okay, so we have our in-memory cache. There it is. We're updating
Mm-hmm.
that. And then we're reading it. We're making a change. And then we're flushing that change to disk.
Oh, okay. Got it.
And now I'm
So we're reading
returning
the
it,
disk, making the change. Okay.
right? If
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
insert a message, I look to see if it exists in our cache. If it doesn't, I add it to the cache. And then, okay, so DB write message, right?
Yep.
What is it? That is,
Mhm.
again, right? Writing it to disk, isn't it? So,
Yeah. That's writing it into that messages
so
directory.
if we kept with the same idea. Remember, I keep saying this is low level. It's talking to disk, right?
Yeah.
Um, but for my brain here, I almost hate that it's a method because it's so level. Because it's so low level, I want to see what that feels like.
Why why wouldn't you want to have it as a method
Because
and then instead
it's
of rather than a
it's
param?
so low level, dude. And it's, first of all, it's unexported. So it's not part of any API that we're going to abstract very soon. It's unexported.
Okay.
It's an internal implementation detail. Second,
Got it.
any function, any code that we've written so far that has touched disk has been what?
Yep.
A function. Read from
Unexported.
disk.
Well,
Function.
function.
Flush from disk, right? Now, here's a case where we're going to flush a message to disk. So now it's not necessarily data JSON, right? But I keep wanting to move it sort of here.
And keep that more for actions on disk.
And you see, if I do that, watch. Oh, we need file path, right? But if I do this and I keep it and I make it more primitive, right?
Hmm.
From an
Yep.
API symmetry perspective, I make it more primitive. It looks primitive. It feels more primitive. It's not
Got it. Okay.
like
I see it.
behavior on the DB here. It's not an
Hmm.
exported API like that. This is a very primitive functionality. So if I say this, it feels more primitive, doesn't it? It doesn't
Yeah,
feel
because like
businessy.
yeah. And
It's been bothering me because everything here, right, is really disk access, functionality. See what I'm saying?
Yes.
Everything down here has been disk related, right? Create
Got
on
it. Okay.
disk,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Right? This is creating
Mm-hmm.
our, right? Now, I could even, just to be a little bit better now, create the database on disk. Read database from disk. Oops,
Oh, that was a yeah.
I'd make these mistakes, but I don't know why. Flush, edit, rename, database to disk. Flush, message to disk. Now, we could maybe shorten this if it feels right. Takes a message. So flush the message to disk, right? And what do you need for that? You need the file path because we have a name and then we're going to do all that good stuff. So that's fine. These are low level primitive functions. This is what I was first trying to abstract, and it just kept feeling bad. And I realized because this is not what a Postgres implementation would be dealing with, right? This is under the covers in Postgres. They have to do this stuff,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
but this isn't what we need to expose. That's why when I first started out, my brain said, this don't feel right, this don't feel right, this don't feel right. So if we opened up the covers in Postgres, we would see something similar to
Got
this,
it. Okay.
right? Because they have to
Yeah,
do
now
these
now it
things,
clicked.
don't they?
Mm-hmm.
Mongo, they have to do these things
Yeah.
because they manage disk. Our API couldn't care less about this. There's going to be some data. So now what we've got is this concept of a database. There's some file path associated with it. There's an account, right? That's also in memory. That's fine. There's a cache of everything with a mutex around it, and the file name to the. Now, I'm wondering where are we using the file name? All right. So I'm going to do an X here,
Right there. Oh,
right here. Insert, read from disk, the file name, right? So instead of having to recreate it, we needed it, right? And then on the other side, we needed the file path. So that's fine. Okay. So this is our database, right? These internals would change at some level, but as we're going to discover, this behavior is always needed. My account, contacts, query, and insert, right? So let's go back now to this. This is going to be a DB, right?
yep.
Actually, it's going to be a DB file
Uh,
for now.
mm,
A DB file dot DB, all right?
mm,
And we're going to fix that too. Hold on.
okay.
All right.
There we are.
Now, um, DB contacts, right? What did I miss here? It's all going to be DB. DB
My DB my account. Yep.
ID. DB read. Now, DB
Query.
query messages. But if you notice, query messages doesn't return the messages. What does query messages do? It
Scroll to
basically
end.
it brings it into the cache, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So this is why I feel like this API is sort of interesting because when we say query messages, and then we have to do what? This lookup. See, to me,
Yes.
that's disjointed. Let's come back here. This query messages, to me,
Oh, okay. You should do that all in.
yeah, because what's important is the query contact, right?
Yeah, you query the contact and then that in itself should query the messages.
Now,
Should give you the
remember what
messages.
we said though. We wanted to just load for efficiency, right? We wanted to uh, load it once. So
Mm-hmm.
what we did was when the thing changed, you see, we contacted the user and then the user had the messages in it. You see that like the silly game we played there with this API?
Yeah.
Query it into the cache, bad API, then find it, and then you'll have the messages. See, so
Mm,
this is sort of wrong. So this is sort of wrong, right? I mean, if you're going to do a query, messages, then it should return the messages, which is this, right?
yeah.
Okay, so let's take a look at this again, because if I ever said query messages, this is sort of what I want, isn't it? If length of messages is greater than 0, then you could just return, which is bad too, but we'll deal with it later. Um, oh, you. See, I almost feel like query messages is the wrong. Oh, but it had to read it off of disk, didn't it? Shit.
It's reading off of
You
disk.
see, this is a disk thing, isn't it?
It is. It is.
Okay. All right. This is why
So
this
that should
API
be,
was bad, bro. Yeah. So this should be this. Read messages, right?
yep.
And I would
And then
argue that it should none of this should happen. It needs a file path,
it does.
just like this needed a file path. Oh, no, it needs a file name. Oh, but it needs a file path to generate it. It's something we do on the fly, right? So, man, what a bad API we wrote. So this, it opens it up. If there's an error, why did we not return an error here? We close it. We have our scanner, right? And then our scanner is supposed to be this. So this would be our, we have no idea how many we're going to get, right?
Mm-hmm.
So messages, messages, S, we don't do anything here. And then we can return messages nil. So here's again a lower level, right? Read
Yes.
messages from disk.
Disk.
Agreed? Again. So yeah, I know we're not using it just yet. So read messages from disk. Okay. So
And
this
we
whole
should rename the messages there, like shorten the message. How we did on flush
oh
message
yeah,
to disk.
right, right. Okay, so let's come back here for a second. The idea is that you're going to query this user, and the messages are going to be in there, right? I mean, that's the whole point. So if we come back up here for a second, the whole point is this query, right? And it's quite possible that we're going to need to read this from disk. So Now, we return a user, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I think we had logic that said this, to be honest with you. So we get the user. If user.messages, if the length of user.messages equals 0, then we did this. And then what we're going to need to do is say u.messages equals messages and u.cache equals that. And then we can return u, right? We just got to store it back. Because query's got to update the cache. So now, if
Got
they
it.
query
Okay.
an ID, we go pull it. If there's no messages in there, then
Then
most
we read the
likely,
messages.
right, we never pulled them off of disk. So now we can read the
Yep.
messages from disk. And it's quite possible that there aren't any, and we keep doing this, but that's not going to hurt us. It's a small issue, right?
Mm-hmm.
But now
Got
the
it.
API is what I would expect it to be. Query it, and you get access to the messages.
Yeah, not two steps.
Right,
It's
not a weird step too, which was a cache at the end of the day. Like
exactly.
super
It's
weird.
it's now contained.
It's like much more real if we were using an actual sort of database.
Yep.
You know, you query it, you expect to get everything back from it. We are managing our own disk, so we got to do that crap. But that is what it is. Now it's really clear that we're reading messages from disk, right? The funny thing is this implementation, right? That disk could be read from DB, and this would all also sort of work. So I'll show you that in a second. And maybe that at the end of the day is what is going to change here. Okay? Maybe at the end of the day. I just want to get everything yellow again. And then I might experiment it with that. So watch this, right? So this is now insert message, right? That's
Yep.
insert message. And here is db dot insert message. Cool. And everything is now peachy, right? db, 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 db. All right. Now, this gets interesting to me. Let me save everything. My first thought was to build an interface around sort of this API. But, one could argue we could also build an interface around sort of that API. But I think that would be inefficient. So let's make sure this still works. And then I'm going to show you how we're going to abstract this storage API away, all right, where we could use another implementation if we wanted to. The API surface area is pretty small, isn't it?
Yeah.
My account, contacts, query, insert. Like that's it. An insert message. That's it. That one feels right. But we got to make sure that this still works. So um, only you and I can play with this right now, and you're going to have to make these changes too,
Yes.
right? You're going to
So
make
let
those
me.
changes. But let me commit this and make sure, well, first of all, let me make sure that this even runs. So, not too many projects, bro. So this was run cap, right? So that should, what did I just do, bro? Damn it, the wrong button. So make run cap isn't really the problem. Nats, oh, did I not? No, we don't have to source anything. What just happened here? Nats create, Nats API 400 description, stream name already in use. That is weird.
We haven't gotten that one before.
Um, no, we haven't gotten that in a while. Now, Remember, I have the delete. Where do we put that delete code there? Where do I comment out the delete? Let me see. Oh, create nats. That's being connect. Oops. No. Chat new. All right. Let me do
There it is.
this. I mean, I want to do that again. So I have that. Let me just make sure this comes up. What was that? Make run client.
Make run client.
Okay, so before I push this, error reading file from client. I'm
Chat zarf
missing
client
DB.
contacts.
No, oh, it shouldn't be contacts anymore. It should be
No.
client DB messages. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so I made a mistake somewhere.
Oh, up.
No, that's right.
Client.
That one's
Yeah,
right.
that's right. It's further
It's gonna be something in here, bro. First of all,
DB
where did that error
messages.
come up? It was trying to read the messages, right?
Yes.
So let's go to our low level.
Read
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 messages from
messages
disk.
from disk. Contacts.
Shouldn't be contacts. It should be what? Um,
Uh,
we're not using our.
Now it's DB messages, right?
Yeah. Well, it might be DB and messages
Yeah,
is the
that's what
problem,
I'm.
right? So file. Okay. So we made sure that existed. Oh no, this is all wrong, dude. Yeah, it's all wrong. Hold on. Everything now should be under client and DB. So, all right. You know what's bad here? This stuff shouldn't be here in new. This is low level crap. All this here,
Do shouldn't be. Yeah.
all this here. Hold on. Okay. This is going to return. I don't know what it should return just yet, but probably return a data file. But not in a pointer semantic form. It doesn't have to be. So we should be file path, our DB name, our directory name, and then the message name. Make sure that exists. That will create this. But we also need to make sure that that exists. Okay. So file path, there's a DB, and then there's a DB message. Then this is going to be at the DB level. We'll do that. We'll do this. We'll do this. We'll return df nil, right?
Okay.
Then oh, we were storing. Okay. The problem here now is with this data file. These paths become. Okay, we have to just do this again over here. So create on disk, right? I don't need the
Okay.
file name. Let's just steal this. All I ever need is the file path. Okay? Let's
Mm-hmm.
fix this, the file path. The file name for creating the DB on disk will be that. Agreed?
Yeah.
Okay. Everything just takes a file path. We have to control that down here. File name.
And each function will control their file name. Okay.
Yeah, we'll do it down here because the up there shouldn't, it doesn't know, right? This is all the low level disk stuff. And we're not maintaining any state from this.
Hmm.
And so now, when it comes to reading messages on disk, I'm just going to keep this for a second. It's directory name, messages. You know, I should have been what? DB messages, directory name. DB messages directory name, that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
And this would have been the same. Okay. Better, because now we're controlling it here. I don't need it to be, I don't need to maintain state with it. So what now that means is that messages directory name. We make sure it gets created there. I don't need file name here anymore, right? All this goes away. None of that should have been here. We're going to call new DB, giving it the file path and the account. And if error, all right. Oh, and you get a data file back. Sorry.
Yeah. Data file.
Okay. And now with the data file, okay, right? All that works. And we don't need to store this. That goes
Nope.
away. Okay.
Oh, file name.
But it's now only path.
Yep. Now everything takes path.
Now, if I run this, ID mismatch. Now, that
Did
might be
you
for another reason.
create DB on disk?
Yep. Maybe I've got the
Read DB. Those are taking file path, not file name.
yeah.
Create DB on disk.
Yeah, so that starts with client, that's slash DB, that's messages, that created the DB.
Oh,
So now,
okay.
right, now we've got
But
the file name. So what I wrong, this is what we should have got, right? This is what is expected, got, right? So this is going to be a bug somewhere in here, but this is what we, I don't know, DF is what we got. And this is what we expected, my account. So let's just run it again My guess is that's what I was expecting,
Okay, I got
right?
nothing.
Yeah, I got nothing, right? That's because the read from disk didn't work. So file path, db, file name. File name is data.json. We opened it, but we didn't read it properly. Why? My account ID name. Let's put money on it that the
Oh,
models didn't change.
ID, no, no, it's my account.
Yeah, that's what we get for. Um, oh, no, wait, that's wrong. It is my account here, isn't it? So, no, that was right. That's the local here, my account. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Which takes an ID and a
My
name.
account. Oh, ID. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So,
Okay.
no, so that was right. So, let's go and look at read on disk for a second. We know it's going to fail, so I can see that. And we know this is wrong. Let's just see if we're even. No, we did it twice.
Oh,
Yeah, ooh is right. All right. Ooh is right. So when we call new with the file path, whatever. Stop trying to help me. That's right, right? Okay.
okay. So there it's right. File path. Yeah.
Oh, we're
Yeah.
bad
Yeah.
human
Yeah.
beings, aren't we?
Yeah, that yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's the problem. We need to pass file path there, right? In other words, that would have solved our problems because. So here we're checking to see if the file exists so we know what to do, but then I was using file name there. So now it's
There
working.
we go.
Didn't know we were going to work on this today, but
But
now we got to
it's
finish
for the
it.
good of the it's
Yeah,
for the good of
but
the project.
okay. So pull that down, but I want to do this last piece, even though it's 10 minutes to noon, right? I mean, we could test the whole thing. Let's test it real quick. Run your cap, run your client, send me a message. I'll send you a message. We'll make sure that that new message shows up. But you had to rearrange everything, right?
Ooh. Oh, I did not do that. Let me see the structure there.
So now under
Uh,
client, you have DB.
Client, yeah, okay, DB.
You rename contact messages, and then you have your data.json.
Oh, hold on. I need to, because I ran this.
Yeah, you're gonna have to delete some other stuff too.
Yeah, so I'm gonna have to delete here, delete. I'll just delete config, except for this, because I need that. Um, delete config. Or can I just move this? Client DB messages. Client DB messages data.json. Okay, I have it here. There we go. Kevin E. There it is.
So send me a
So
message.
delete and give me the structure one more time. I'm just checking. Okay, data
Zarf
ID,
client
messages,
DB
cab
messages
ID.
data
Okay, we're
JSON.
good. We should be good now. Okay. So Make run cap. Make run client. Client DB messages. Why are you saying there's no such
Did you
directory?
pull latest?
Yeah, I did. I did.
Okay, Zarf client DB MSGS.
Yeah, and my messages is empty.
And that's fine, but it won't start
Okay,
with
so
it
let me.
empty.
So
So then let
no,
me,
it's starting.
yeah,
Hold
that's
on.
fine. Just send me a message.
There it
Okay, you
is.
just
Now it
send
popped in.
hello, right?
It's just when
So,
you first have it, if it's empty, it'll tell you there's no such file. But I
oh,
had you in my contacts.
no, but that's bad. Okay, let me just make sure this works,
Yeah.
dude. You
Yep,
got
it
that.
worked. Yep, and it wrote to the file. Yep.
Now, you're saying when the messages,
Yeah, if I have you in my contacts, but we haven't sent each other a message yet, it will tell me there's no such
oh, this
file.
right here. Read, no, read
Yes. No.
messages from
And
disk.
read messages. Yep.
But, and oh yeah, and that showed up in the UI.
And it
But
shows
that's,
up in the UI.
but that's possible. So,
It is if I first add you to a contact and I start it, there
so
won't
let's
be
do this for that. Actually, I did it the wrong way. Sorry. Let's just return an empty slice and nil because it may not be there. You know what I'm saying?
yeah.
Okay. Okay. Now I did all of this work, not just to clean up the code, which I'm glad we did. Okay. But because, right, and what we could also do is just call this disk.go for this.
Move all of that.
Yeah. That, you know how I say it, I start with a line and then eventually I decide
You
whether or
move it if
not,
it ends up being enough. Yeah.
yeah, and there's enough meaning sort of behind it, right? So, like anything related to the disk, right? We have here.
Is in there. And it
Yeah.
makes and it makes sense. Okay.
Now, one other thing we could have done, right? Um, the DB name, hold on. Let's get rid of this. Well, we kind of did it a little bit, but we had these, right? But, you
Mhm.
know, oh, I needed the file path to do that. Okay. I mean, one thing I need the file path to do that. So it's no big deal running this extra little code. Like we could have pre-created these, right? And stored them. In other words, and we would get away with this. So DB file and DB messages, actual directory, right? So what I'm saying is we know this represents the DB file. Agreed?
Yep.
We know this represents
DB
the,
message
right?
directory. Yep. Make it a little more readable.
And this is really the file directory, isn't it?
Mhm.
And then you have the sort of DB file itself, which represents this, right? Arguably. So you got the DB file directory, message directory, DB file. So now what I'm saying is create DB on disk. So we don't need this make anymore, actually, because we already did it here. And, oh, dude, this is interesting, actually. I hate the use of singletons, but by using the singleton now, we know this is the DB file name, isn't it?
Okay, yeah. Now they don't have to take
We don't need this anymore.
no.
It's a little ugly, but I don't need this anymore.
A little bit less code
And
everywhere.
this now really is the isn't it?
Yep.
This one has to be sort of on the fly. So by doing that, right? I hate singletons, but by creating these singletons here on the new,
Yep.
we know you have to call new.
Now no more file path.
We don't even need to store the file path anymore
Nope.
because we will never use it again. We call it once here. I don't even need to store it anymore. Disk here. Because this already sort of saves a version of it, you know.
Yeah.
So now this is just a little simpler too. So we create a new DB, and then you just read from disk. We sort of store it. I should be able to just run this again. It should just work. Nope. So what did we do wrong? DB file directory, DB message directory, DB file name. Good. We make. Check. So read from disk again. Read the DB file name. Oh, DB file. That was bad. DB. Oh, did I screw up? No, I didn't make a mistake there.
No. No, no, no.
All right.
That's good.
DB file. Create database on this DB file. Directory name. All right. So that was confusing, right? Because I created something called DB file name here, and then the DB file. Name. Yeah, so that was my bad. So this name should only be used once, and it is. But I didn't see your messages. So, still got a problem with reading messages. Because this should be directory, not name. Man, I mean, once we get this right, it never changes again, but it's pretty bad, right? Okay, there you are.
There it is. And we're back.
Just some more code cleanup. Okay, so let's do this last piece, even though it's 2 hours now. I went to all of this. Oh, shoot. I went to all of this trouble for one reason. I want to be able to use any implementation of a database, right?
Yep.
I mean, that was the whole point of this. Because when you look at, let's say, app here, what is app using? It's using,
Query.
right? It's using query. So watch this for a second. What if we said that app defines, and we still have to move these other things in their own package, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But let's just, for now, and we'll just do it here, type um, a storage interface, all right? And I know I haven't put anything in here yet, but the idea is that we should be able to do that. Now, three things happen, right? Query contact ID is no longer there, right? So you have this behavior. And we got to define a type for this in a minute. That my account, it's all going to break down on the type system, but we're going to fix that. And then there's contacts. Okay. So these are the three behaviors, essentially, that app uses.
Okay.
Okay. Now, for this to work, we have a problem. You see, we've got a type named user, right?
Yes.
And essentially, DB file is going to have to use this type. And so will app. In fact, we're going to have the same problem when I want to do this. And I'll do this for now. Call it app storage for now. All right. So I'm going to have the same
Okay.
problem in client. Because client, and let's just say we call this client storage for a minute. Right. Rob Pike said, don't design with interfaces, discover them. So what behaviors are we using here? We're using insert. We're using insert contact, insert message, and just insert message, right? So on this side, we're using insert contact, and we're using insert message. Okay, these are the two behaviors. Oh, and query. Sorry. So on both of these, we were using query. Okay. But this is using insert, and this side is just using these things, right? Okay. And so what we're trying to say here is that we don't care we don't care about the implementation details for storage. You just have to promise me this behavior. That if I insert,
Okay.
I can insert a contact, I can insert a message, and then I can query that contact by ID and get all this back. An app is saying, I don't care about your implementation as long as I can query and get my account information and get the list of contacts. That's what I need. Now, we have a problem. We've got a type system issue now. We're going to have multiple packages when we're done, and right now we just have one package, okay? But assuming that we split out app and we split out client to their own packages next week. We have this one common type that has to be used by everybody. It's called user. This type right now is sort of defined here, right? I mean, that's where it's defined. But this common type needs to be used by DB file, app, and client. Now, I could argue that if we keep app and client together, okay, then we could sort of fix this fairly quickly. What if I add a new file called model dot, just model dot, how can I spell this today? Go, okay? And I take this type and I move it here. So I move it as part of the app package right now. So what that would mean to me is what I'm going to say is that our implementation uses the app user in everything it does. We need a single type for this to work, but let's say we do this, okay? So we're letting the implementation of storage import app, which means app can no longer import DB file. You don't have imports in one direction. But that's not a problem because the interface is going to make it so we don't have to have these two imports. In other words, these implementations are trying to support, in our case, app. This implementation is trying to support app, not the other way around. So the implementation detail has to use the app's type system in order to support it. You want bananas. I got to give you bananas. You got to tell me what a banana looks like. I'll give it to you all day, right? I import what you need. The interface is going to give us the abstraction to do that. So for now, if I put user here, this is going to break down a little bit if we split app and client, because now we've got to create a package with a type system, and I'm never happy with that. So this is telling me already that app and client really can't be split because they're intrinsically connected to each other through this sort of user type. They're telling me that these two things, at least the way we've implemented it today, they're sort of glued together. Now, we might be able to define another interface to separate them, and we could try to discover that next week, okay? But right now, they're sort of glued together because of this user type. They're glued together.
Got it. Okay.
But we need to look at that relationship again next week and see if there's another interface that will separate it. So here's the thing now. You see how nothing is red anymore?
Yeah.
This implementation of DB file says that this is how you create. Now, we haven't done any of this, right? And we've been doing this, right? So DB represents data storage support for what is this? Account and contacts.
Contact.
Right?
Yep.
Okay. Then new DB creates a new DB for use or something. I don't know. My account returns the current. Okay, good. Contacts turns a How about collection? All contacts in the database. Query retrieves a contact by ID. Insert adds a new contact to the database, right? Okay. Insert adds a, now why didn't it use the same thing, right? Adds a new,
Message.
all right, give
Yep.
me some consistency. And this is that API implementation that we've got here. And then model, user represents a user in the system, right? That's me. So we now have one implementation of storage that uses our local disk. Our app at this point doesn't care about implementation details. It just says what? Just give me a concrete implementation of this interface. Client says,
Mm,
give me a concrete implementation of this interface. And in main, we construct a concrete implementation of the interface. Look at the call to new client. What does it accept? Something that
hierarchy.
implements client
Okay. A
storage.
client storage. Yep.
App, what does it implement? Something that implements
App
app
storage.
storage. You see why everything is, what does that mean now? What it means is, okay, putting this type here, and now defining the interfaces here. No, we didn't do any comments anywhere here. Did we decide that
No.
we weren't going to use comments?
Yes, we did.
Oh, why didn't you stop me, bro? I can't remember
I
what
I like
project I'm working on anymore.
I like the comments.
I know, but I find these comments to be useless. So for an internal code base where I'm not using GoDoc, I won't use
Hmm.
it. For a third-party package that's going to be up in go.dev, you have to do it. But like
Got
that
it.
wasn't really giving us any information. It was just a redundancy on what we sort of already knew, right? But since we decided not to do that, I'm going to get rid of it. But you understand what we now did? We implemented a concrete implementation first. We applied that concrete implementation everywhere. We then looked at what behavior was needed. We then added
Hmm.
the interface with the exact behavior that was required. And then we swapped out the concrete type with the interface type. Everything worked
Got it.
because the
Okay.
behavior is now being accessed indirectly. Now, if you wanted, let's double check that everything works here. I can do that by just by running the client. Look, right? It's now accessing it through the interface. There's no more, hold on here. Let me put this. Now using interface for storage. So now, if we want another implementation of storage, let's say with Postgres instead,
Hmm.
we can do it. We just add a new package under storage, and we implement essentially a new function that returns a concrete type that what? Implements my account, implements contacts, implements like all these behaviors,
Got it.
implements
Yeah.
these three, and then these extra two. And then
Very cool.
in main, you just decide what implementation are you going to use, right?
App or client. Got it.
You know, which one are you going to use? And right, and Delaney's going, oh, now I can use data star. Yeah, you can use any storage implementation you want as long as you now implement this contract of behavior. Pretty cool, right? I allowed myself in this session, this coding session, to get confused with all of the low level writing to disk that we had to do, thinking that that was what I needed to abstract. But that was silly. This was not what we needed to track. This was and that's why it's all unexported, a complete implementation detail of persisted storage using JSON. This was the real behavior we needed. And I think now we've separated pretty cleanly those two sorts of behaviors, right? You know what I'm saying?
Very cool. Yeah.
By renaming this stuff. So I
Hmm.
know now next week on Tuesday when we come back and we start reading this read message from disk, we're not going to be confused again between
Yeah,
disk and cache.
it's
Now,
more explicit.
I don't know if I'm happy calling this cache instead of contacts. And you know what? I don't know if I was happy calling that um, cache versus contacts, but man, what's going on here? Where is this coming from?
Mm,
Oh,
Cache,
here.
right there. Yep.
Yeah. I'm going to put it back to contacts, and then next week I'm going to come back and look at this and ask myself, was this enough for me to not get confused anymore that this is in
Yeah.
memory, right?
Is that model still there? That
Yeah,
mental
and
model.
I think the mental model will be there now, especially with some of these comments sort of here, right? Now,
Yes.
this is too low level, right? Update, um, update the storage. Oh no, this is part of our thing, so that one's fine, right? Update maybe the local file because if we ever change the name, that comment won't matter anymore. All right, let me just push this last thing, and actually, let's go to main here for a second. So we didn't do anything I wanted to do, which was that, right? So
Tracking the nonce. Yep.
why are you doing this? Stop trying to help. So we did a storage refactor today, and I mean, basically we finished it. I don't think there's a note there, right?
We did. Yeah.
So on Tuesday, we're going to try now to come back and do this. The big problem for everybody watching is either delete everything under client and sort of start over, or you've got to reorganize because this is much better now for us, I think, in terms of our um, DB file implementation, right? Our
Yeah.
data.json and our messages and stuff. So I'm happy with that change. I don't think there's any notes to write.
No, we kind of went off script today.
Yeah. And so let me come back here. So I think we're going to try now on Tuesday with these changes to write the nonce and stuff back. But I think it was a nice lesson in how we could take a concrete implementation, right, clean it up for mental models because that was a mess, and
Yep.
then discover the interfaces we needed to allow ourselves to be able to sort of. And I didn't do this so we could test. I did this because our disk implementation is good, but if
Hmm.
somebody wanted to have a little bit more robustness in that, they were really going to manage a lot of contacts or something. All right. And it gives anybody watching the ability to implement their own sort of version of that storage, however they want. And everything should just work. So that's pretty cool.
No, it was cool. I enjoyed watching the refactor and everything like that. I think it's important, especially if it's, code you're going to be working on and maintaining for a little while.
And the thing is, we look at this code every like it was over the weekend now. And
Yeah.
so that's adding some advantage to our ability to understand we didn't have a mental model of it. When you're working in the code every single day, right, your mental
Yeah.
models are in place. And then you don't get back to it for 6 weeks. And then it's really hard, right? Like we're only like
Yeah,
four
you
days
forgot.
away and we're struggling, and
Yeah.
imagine you got to go back. And now that's when that code is becoming legacy because you can't even, you wrote it and you have no idea what's going on. And every time we make a
Exactly.
code change, other things change, right? And that's what I want you to be seeing. So I don't want to hear you don't have time for what we did today. Yeah, we ate up 2.5 hours, but that 2.5 hours is going to save us huge amount of times, and somebody else I don't even know, in the future.
For sure.
Okay, and Delaney's talking about you can use any front end you want as long as it's, yeah. I mean, we're using Go because it's a Go podcast, but for sure you can, because we made everything Ethereum based,
Hmm.
right? You can use the Ethereum JavaScript package that's out there. You look at the blockchain can't talk anymore. Blockchain project for that. Um, for sure, I'm not using SQL C. I don't like SQL C. I like using SQL X, Amir. I like having my SQL right there in the code, but we're not doing any SQL right now. We implemented it without, because if we add that now, I got to load a Postgres, right? We got to get Docker involved. I don't want that. I'm trying to do what? Clone and go, clone and go, clone and go.
Yeah.
But it was a good lesson around it, around interfaces at least. All right, so we are done for the day. I'm going to sign this stuff off and thank everybody for hanging out.